Hi, my name is Leah Ahava and I am an autistic Rebbitzin. Sorry it's been a while since the previous video in this series. The first one went up before Pesach and now it's after Shavuot. Here's hoping all the last few weeks counted for something. Anyway, after in my last video I introduced this series examining Moshe through an autistic lens. That video looked at traits having to do with how Moshe experiences and responds to his environment generally. Today, we're going to look at how he experiences and responds to people. Now that we've got a feel for the water, let's dive in. This might sound obvious, but communication is a central element in relationships. Also, possibly obvious. Autistics and neurotypicals often communicate differently. Moshe's communication differences are revealed early in his story. In Shemot 4, Moshe describes himself as not a man of words and slow of tongue. When he questions why he was chosen to lead the people out of Egypt. Later in the same chapter, we see that Moshe has his brother Aharon convey his words to Paro for him. The Talmud expands on Moshe's communication differences and his efforts to meet others' expectations in this area. In Shabbat 89a, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi relates a story about an interaction between Moshe and Hashem. The story goes like this. Moshe comes upon Hashem and observes that he is affixing ornamental crowns onto the letters of the words of the Torah. Moshe says nothing. Hashem is like, don't people where you come from greet each other? Moshe replies, does the servant greet his master? That would be disrespectful. Seeing where Moshe is coming from, Hashem says, you should have at least assisted me and wished me success in my work. Immediately, Moshe responds by quoting Bamidbar 14:7, saying, and now may the power of the Lord be as great as you have spoken. What's happening here? First of all, Moshe is not one for small talk, so he's not going to say something just to fill a silence. Second of all, Moshe sees himself in a specific role in this dynamic, where there isn't anything for him to say that moves the greater structure forward. He's a subordinate, and his superior is engaged in a task. He's not going to barge in and say, howdy, like they're equals, so he says nothing so as to not disturb his superior's focus. Most neurotypicals would feel a pressure to fill what they perceive as an awkward silence, then jump into small talk when prompted for a greeting. Let's compare Moshe's coming into Hashem's domain with Mr. Carson from Downton Abbey, the probably neurotypical but highly trained butler from Downton Abbey entering the Earl's study. Unless Carson needs to communicate an emergency, there's no way he would intrude on his employer and speak first. But if the Earl had prompted him for a casual greeting, Carson would probably not be casual in his reply, but he also would not dispute his employer's request. He'd find a neutral way to sidestep the issue. Moshe, however, addresses the hierarchical elephant in the room head on. He pairs a confused question about what was expected of him with a blunt explanation of where he's coming from. Since we're misunderstood so much, autistics and other neurodivergent people often have an urge to explain ourselves over things that seem like no big deal. Moshe rises to the explicitly stated expectations by giving Hashem a blessing. But the story doesn't say one way or another whether Moshe came away from the interaction with any greater understanding of the dynamic than he had going into it. Did the communication mismatch get resolved? We don't know. But there's more to Moshe's social differences than communication. He misreads situations that involve other people, and he has difficulty adjusting to unmet expectations. Moshe takes it literally when he's told it is his task to lead the people. For whatever reason, he interprets this to mean that he has to do all of the leadership work for all 600,000 people. Can you imagine being individually responsible for untangling every dispute from more than 500,000 people? Count me out, y'all. But until Yitro tells him to delegate judges for smaller matters in Shemot 18, that's exactly what Moshe thinks he's supposed to be doing. He's perfectly happy to act on the good ideas of others to make his job make more sense, but it might seem surprising for many that he didn't create a dispute resolution system with delegated leaders to begin with. This reminds me of my almost definitely autistic grandfather of blessed memory, who would make his own electronics in the most convoluted ways possible, unless my brother was there to point out ways to simplify them. That's how we ended up with a 5-way individual volume adjustable headphone splitter the size of a brick in the 90s. When his expectations are challenged in a way that helps, like the suggestion to set up judges, Moshe can roll with it, but it's much more difficult for him when he is expecting something positive and it doesn't pan out. Every time the people experience Hashem's miracles, Moshe thinks that their inspiration to be their best selves and that their emunah, or trust in Hashem, will last. And he's always proven wrong. If we look at the song Dayenu, it recounts a whole string of miracles and asserts that it would have been enough. But the narrative of the Torah shows that this isn't so. Taking us out of Egypt, splitting the sea, giving us manna, giving us the Torah and the Sabbath and safety in the wilderness and even our own homeland was never enough. The people always complain and they always find new ways to sin. Moshe never learns to expect or accept this. On the flip side, Moshe is so used to miracles that he comes to expect them. My mom's favorite part of the entire Torah is the moment in Shemot 14 when the Egyptian army has the Israelites cornered and Moshe tries to reassure the Israelites, saying, Hashem will fight your war and you will be silent. And Hashem is like, and of course, I paraphrase, how about not? Tell the people to get their butts into the sea and split it yourself, dude. Moshe takes it in stride, but it's notable that he's not the first to go into the water, and part of me has to wonder if this is because he needs time to process the information. Just like he misreads larger situations, Moshe also misreads people and their motives, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. When Moshe sends spies into Eretz Yisrael to scope out the land in Deuteronomy 1, he does so because he mistakes their reticence to enter the land for excitement. He sends them in thinking that they're going to come back singing the land's praises, but they come back with slander. And in Bamidbar 32, he completely misunderstands why the tribes of Reuven and Gad want their own portion of the land to be east of the Yarden. He tells them, he gives them a heavy rebuke because he thinks they want to avoid helping the rest of the tribes reclaim their homeland by settling down in the first place they get to. But the real reason Reuven and Gad want that spot is because it's good grazing land for their herds. They have herds. That spot's a good spot for herds, so they want that spot. And they're perfectly happy to still help the rest of the people too. Between his challenges being understood and his challenges understanding others, it's difficult for Moshe to maintain his relationships with people around him, even and perhaps especially the people he should be closest to. Moshe is hardly close with anyone until he meets Yitro. He gravitates to Yitro immediately because he's the first person Moshe meets as an adult who answers kindness with kindness. The Egyptian Moshe killed was beating a Hebrew slave, and then the Hebrews he protected ratted him out. Moshe chased the shepherds who were harassing Yitro's daughter away from the well so they could access water, and those same daughters did nothing to thank Moshe for his assistance. It was only when word of the deed got to Yitro in Shemot 2 that he instructed that Moshe be brought to his encampment and be honored with a feast. In the very next verse, not only does Moshe break bread with Yitro, he settles down in Yitro's community and shepherds his flock. Side note about shepherds. Shepherding is not a job for the meek. The job description includes fighting off large predators and bandits. In the Bronze Age, when medicines and hygiene protocols that we have today did not exist, being someone's shepherd was a big freaking deal. So, the moment someone responded to Moshe with kindness, that person was rewarded with the fierce loyalty that autistic people often demonstrate to their friends. It's worth noting that Moshe's wife and children are rarely mentioned in the Torah, implying that they don't get much of his time and attention. His duties as a prophet to the people come first before his duties as a husband and a father. It's clear that Moshe does not succeed in imparting his teachings to his own children in any way that's greater than the people at large. For one thing, it's not one of his own sons who's set to succeed him as a leader. Yehoshua received that honor in Bamidbar 27. And jumping forward in the Tanakh, we see in Judges 18 that Moshe's own grandson is an idol worshiper. None of this is to say that being a failure as a parent is an autistic trait. Leading the people is an enormous task. So is parenting. Moshe also has difficulty being a supportive brother. When Aharon needs him the most, Moshe is too hyper-focused on his duties as a prophet to notice. Normally, a mourner cannot eat the meat of a sacrifice, and a Kohen cannot offer a sacrifice during the period before the deceased they are mourning is buried. So, when two of Aharon's sons die on the day that the Mishkan is being inaugurated, Aharon is forced to offer the necessary sacrifice because as Kohen Gadol, he's the only person who can do it. But because he's a mourner, he does not eat the sacrifice. The rest of the Kohanim, who at this time are all Aharon's surviving sons, also do not eat the sacrifice for the same reason. There's nobody who could halakhically eat it, so they burn it. Moshe takes issue with this until Aharon points out that they cannot eat the sacrifice as mourners. Moshe's stance is that because this sacrifice was the type that was supposed to be eaten, Kohanim needed to eat it. Let's recall that Moshe himself is in the habit of placing his ritual duties ahead of his family duties. Not only does he hold that the laws of mourning do not apply to the Kohen Gadol, but he also questions the rest of the Kohanim about why they burned it. Moshe knows the laws of mourning, but he has it in his head that the singular specialness of the event and the fact that there's no Kohanim unrelated to the deceased means that his brother and his nephews don't get to mourn their loss on the same day it happened because they have a job to do. The sacrifice had to be eaten, but there was no Kohen who could eat it. So Moshe couldn't get past the fact that it had to be eaten to see his loved one's pain. Even when Moshe does offer condolences earlier in Vayikra 10:3, he does so in an atypical way. He tells Aharon, this, quote, "This is what Hashem said. With those close to me, I am holy, and therefore, in front of all the nation, I'm honored." What on earth does that mean? It's saying that the sons who were killed by heavenly fire were nevertheless close to Hashem. He could not cut them slack because it would encourage the idea that achieving a certain level of holiness grants someone the ability to rewrite Hashem's rules. No sage or priest should be allowed to twist Hashem's Torah to support things that go against Hashem. The philosophy holds water, but it's still a strange thing to say to your brother who just witnessed two of his sons going up in flames. But really, what can you say in a situation like that? As odd a choice as Moshe made, Aharon is actually comforted by what he said and pulls himself together enough to finish the task at hand. Once again, this video is getting pretty long, so stay tuned for part 3. I also wanted to say thank you so much for sticking with me and subscribing. There's 101 of you now, like little Dalmatian puppies. Comment to let me know whether you would like 101 bad jokes or 101 facts about me to celebrate. Happy Pride, and I'll see you later.